Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Welcome back, dear friends, those who have enrolled for the Masters of English Literature program with Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar University. This is from the Chaitanya studio of the university, myself, Professor Dilip Barad, and I am going to deal with the third part in the series of talks on John Dryden's essay of dramatic poesy. So far in the essay, we have seen two parts we have already seen. The first one was on context, introduction and summary of the essay. Second part was on the definition of a play, and this is the third part where we are going to talk about Dryden's views on English playwrights. Dryden himself has not divided the essay in these parts. Neither these are chronological parts. These parts are made with reference to the learner's way of learning, or it can help learners in understanding what views and how they are expressed by Dryden. So the parts are divided by the speaker here, the content creator, not by John Dryden. Okay, so let us see the third part of our essay here. In this essay, we are going to talk about Dryden's views on Francis Beaumont, John Fletcher, Ben Jonson and William Shakespeare, the English dramatist here. Okay, so first John Fletcher. Dryden is not writing a kind of a biographical sketch or general things about John Fletcher or Ben Jonson. Because John Fletcher and Beaumont are almost lost to us, we need to know something more about them. So I have added a few slides wherein we come to know about this English poet and playwrights. So first, John Fletcher, who lived between 1579 and 1625, who was a poet and a playwright. Most scholars acknowledge that Fletcher's real talent lay in comedy, especially in the genre of tragicomedy. As we have seen during our previous talks also, that Neander, the fourth imaginary character in the play, is there to defend English theatre and English playwrights. And one of the very crucial challenges that he is going to face is about the defense of tragicomedies. As per classical canon, the mixing of tragedy and comedy is not allowed. So here when the English dramatists are mixing it, and how would Dryden give a defense to that? Okay, so that is where John Fletcher, about whom he wants to say something significant, something useful, he was a master of tragicomedy. His style of tragicomedy at its best manages to generate considerable power through the sheer variety of the emotions it arouses. Fletcher is noted as a master of plot contrivance and character manipulation and of exaggerated speech used for dramatic effect. There is a high melodrama that we can see is found in John Fletcher. The Greek tradition were again very important to note that they were not for high melodrama, but for a controlled and subtle way of expressing emotions and feelings. The customary 10-syllable line of Elizabethan dramatic blank verse overflows in Fletcher's hands into lines of 11 and sometimes 12 syllables, and he frequently employs run-on lines to achieve his goal. But for all the appearance of wild abundance and headlong extravagance in his use of language, his is a highly mannered style. John Fletcher's works strongly influenced his contemporaries as well as his successors. His heroes, preoccupied with the themes of love or honor or both, are the immediate forebears of the protagonist of the plays of the Restoration period. Fletcher's particular technical abilities served him well in handling plots of comic intrigue, and his delight in verbal display found its proper aim in the witty banter, with which the sophisticated young men and women in his comedies match their forces in the game of love. When this essay is written by John Dryden, it is restoration time. And during this restoration time, he is remembering Fletcher and Beaumont as very popular dramatists also. And we can understand from this description that why were they popular? Because their comedies, tragicomedies, their heroes, their characters, the witty banter, that was something which was very significant part of the characteristics of comedy of manners, which were quite popular during Restoration era. Francis Beaumont, who lived between 1584 and 1616, a poet and a playwright. Best known for the tragicomedies, he wrote together with John Fletcher from about 1606 to 1614. The two collaborated on several plays. The exact number is disputed that were very popular with audience of the time. So, during Restoration time also, so many plays were on the stage during this time, and that were of Beaumont and Fletcher, either individually written or collaboratively written. The team of Beaumont and Fletcher probably collaborated on about 10 plays. By the time Beaumont retired in 1614, these collaborations had helped establish both men in the ranks of the best dramatists. Now, this is very interesting to note also that somebody who was quite popular, considered best dramatist, even after their deaths in the subsequent time, that was Restoration time. But today, after this many years, these writers are almost lost also. Thanks to Dryden, who mentioned them, that we may refer to these dramatists who were popular during their time and also during around 30-40 years after their deaths also. The production dates of nearly all of these works are uncertain. The two playwrights co-authored popular works such as Philaster, maybe in 1609, The Maid's Tragedy, probably in 1610, and A King and No King in 1611. Other collaborations include The Coxcomb 1612, The Captain 1613, and Cupid's Revenge in 1611. A probable date is 1611. Okay. Beaumont and Fletcher together, collaborative efforts are characterized by ingenious plots, diversified characters, and realistic dialogue. Their comedies were witty and sophisticated, which foreshadowed the licentious comedies of the Restoration. Therein lies the secret of their popularity during the era of Restoration. Most of the duo's major plays consist chiefly of a series of incidents rather than sustained development of character and action. Their plays remained incredibly popular until the closing of the theatres under the Puritan Commonwealth in 1642. One of the darkest chapters in the history of English theatre is shutting down of the theatres by the Puritan regime. Dryden on both of them, he writes further. So, these were some general information about Beaumont and Fletcher and their contribution to English theatre. Restoration dramatist John Dryden, in his essay of dramatic poesy, which is published in 1668 and which is under our discussion, explained the favorable public response to the plays by citing their universal appeal. He made following observation on Beaumont and Fletcher, and I quote from the essay: Beaumont and Fletcher, of whom I am next to speak, had, with the advantage of Shakespeare's wit, which was their precedent, great natural gifts improved by study. So they were better than William Shakespeare. They learned from Shakespeare, but then they bettered, they improved by study, and so they were better performers than William Shakespeare. Beaumont, especially being so accurate a judge of plays that Ben Jonson, while he lived, submitted all his writings to his censure, and it's thought used his judgment in correcting if not contriving, all his plots. Now, this is a great credit to Beaumont and Fletcher, given by John Dryden, that even a dramatist like John Dryden, who was a master dramatist, a classicist, he would give the plays to Beaumont and Fletcher to be checked and verified. And all the corrections which were made by them, they were accepted by John Dryden to make his plays better. Yeah? What value he had for him appears by the verses he read to him, and therefore I need not need speak no farther of it. The first play which brought Fletcher and him in esteem was their Philaster. For before that they had written 2 or 3 very unsuccessfully, as the like is reported on Ben Jonson before the writ Every Man in His Humour. I continue quoting from the essay. Their plots were generally more regular than Shakespeare's. Remember this, more regular than Shakespeare's, especially those which were made before Beaumont's death, and they understood and imitated the conversation of gentlemen much better, whose wild debaucheries and quickness of wit in repartees no poet can ever paint as they have done. This humour of which Ben Jonson derived from particular persons, they made it not their business to describe. They represented all the passions very lively, but above all love. So all the passions were presented very lively in the play, but above all the passion of love was extremely well presented by Beaumont and Fletcher. We also get an example that what Dryden meant by lively when he used that word just and lively in the definition of the play. All forms of passions which are lively are represented here, including love. I continue reading from the original part of the essay about Beaumont and Fletcher. I am apt to believe, I, that is Dryden, believe the English language in them arrived to its highest perfection. What words have since been taken in are rather superfluous than necessary. Their plays are now the most pleasant and frequent entertainments of the stage, 2 of theirs being acted through the year, for one of Shakespeare's or Jonson's. So that is a very interesting credit or the value or the popularity of Beaumont and Fletcher, that to one play of Beaumont and Fletcher, of Ben Jonson and Shakespeare, 2 of Beaumont and Fletcher were performed during this time. The reason is because there is a certain gaiety in their comedies and pathos in their more serious plays, which suits generally with all men's humour. Shakespeare's language is likewise a little obsolete, and Ben Jonson's wit comes short of theirs. Now that is quite interesting, yeah? That according to Dryden, during those years of Restoration, Beaumont and Fletcher had such an influence that Dryden, kind of a dramatist, have to write something wherein he proves that they got more merit than Shakespeare and Ben Jonson in some aspect of writing of the plays. So the language of Shakespeare is more obsolete than this dramatist, and Ben Jonson's wit comes short of theirs also to a greater extent in many of the plays also. Though to us Beaumont and Fletcher are almost lost, but Dryden or during the time of Dryden, they must have been quite popular, and they were quite well performed also before the shutting down of the theatres. Coming to the next dramatist, that is William Shakespeare, Dryden's observations on William Shakespeare. In his remarks on Shakespeare, Dryden ceases to be a classicist and goes over to the other camp of the Romantics. When we think of classicism and romanticism, let us keep one definition in mind here, that romantic poets or romantic dramatists are those who do not follow classical traditions, or they try to break away from the classicism or classical tradition. Dryden is classicist, But when it comes to William Shakespeare, he is found on the other side of the Romantics. His appreciation of the comprehensive soul of Shakespeare is a tribute to his own comprehensive soul and his imaginative sensibility also. If in Beaumont and Fletcher we may find Dryden has exaggerated little bit more because they are lost to us with the passage of time. With his words on William Shakespeare, we may have to say that Dryden has even grown as a critic, because Shakespeare was not appreciated as such as Beaumont and Fletcher were during this time, living during his time also. Like when Shakespeare was alive, there were remarks made that Shakespeare's plays are never performed in royal court. They fall short on the ethical and moral standard. They may be high on popular standards, but not on those standards that decent people or royal families would love to enjoy Shakespeare. Ben Jonson, on the other hand, was the favorite of the courts. I quote Dryden about what he said about William Shakespeare. To begin then with Shakespeare, he was the man who, of all moderns and perhaps ancient poets, had the largest and the most comprehensive soul. All the images of nature were still present to him, and he drew them not laboriously but luckily. The word luckily here we have to take in terms of naturally. Not luckily means by accident or by chance or by fluke. Not by fluke, by chance, by accident, but naturally. That is the meaning of the word luckily that we'll have to put here. When he describes anything, you more than see it, you feel it. Those who accuse him to have wanted learning give him the greater commendation. He was naturally learnt. He needed not the spectacles of books to read nature. He looked inwards and found her there. I cannot say he is everywhere alike. Were he so, I should do him injury to compare him with the greatest of mankind. So a few important things about Shakespeare that we come to know from this observation is that Shakespeare was naturally learnt writer. We know that he was not good in Greek and Latin. His education was limited to maybe primary school or high school. He was good in English language, vernacular language, but he was not good in classical languages like Greek and Latin. He was not a university scholar, and most of the university scholars like Ben Jonson or Christopher Marlowe also, they were university scholars. And so we find lots of words or expressions of Latin and Greek in Ben Jonson and in Christopher Marlowe, but where we rarely come across a single Greek or Latin word in William Shakespeare. So he was not learned in that way, but then his reading of nature was more profound. His reading of human nature was even deeper than those who might have learnt about man and matters from books. So, but at the end also he says that, well, I don't say that he is great in all the terms, that otherwise I would have to tell that he is a kind of an avatari purush. He's an avatar of something, but no, he was not the greatest of mankind. He was excellently writing plays, and that is what he says here. I continue saying something more about that from the essay. I quote Dryden, he is many a times flat, insipid, his comic wit degenerated into clenches, his serious swelling into bombast, but he is always great when some great occasion is presented to him. No man can say he ever had a fit subject for his wit, and did not then rise himself as high above the rest of the poets. This is a very interesting observation by Dryden on this. So he was not always great in all the things that he has written. He is sometimes flat, insipid, his comedy degenerates into clenches, his seriousness swelling into bombast also. But given an occasion, if there is a situation in a play, he would raise beyond the levels of everything. If you just go back and look at some of the scenes from his famous plays like Hamlet or Macbeth, we find that even a smaller scene like a prayer scene where Claudius is praying and he is confessing, he is murdering his brother, how poetically that play is written. How well he says that when Claudius is in the prayer scene, that I know my prayers will not reach to heaven, because the rule of the heaven says that if you want to do penance, first of all, you will have to do away with the gains that you have acquired by wrong manners. That is, the queen Gertrude and the throne which was aptly for the brother. You have taken the throne of the brother and the wife of the brother. Unless you do not do away with both the things, your prayers will not reach to the heaven. Claudius himself is speaking that. He is well aware that his penance is not going to work out in an effective manner. But we can say that, see the imagination of Shakespeare. Given an occasion, no other poets perhaps can rise or raise themselves to such an imaginative power. Dryden's observations further on Shakespeare, he further adds that, I quote from the essay, however, others are now generally preferred before him. Yes, however, others are, like Beaumont and Fletcher, for example, are generally preferred before him. Yet the age wherein he lived, which had contemporaries with him, Fletcher and Johnson, never equalled them to him in their esteem. And in the last King's Court, when Ben's reputation was at highest, Sir John Suckling, and with him the greater part of the courtiers, set our Shakespeare far above him. So he cites one incident, a very rare incident, to prove that Shakespeare was considered by at least a few of them at par or better than Ben Jonson or other people. But in a general estimation, he was not considered so. These remarks are illuminating and suggestive. They show that Dryden was quite conscious of both the weakness and real greatness of Shakespeare. This is where, as a comparatist, as a critic, Dryden also raises in our esteem. And that's how he has passed the test of time. That is how he is alive even today with us. And we study John Dryden as a critic in this 21st century also. He is able to see both the weaknesses and the real greatness of William Shakespeare. Dryden's observations on Ben Jonson, the fourth and the final dramatist from the English theatre. Next follows illuminating remarks on Ben Jonson, who is compared with Shakespeare also. And in this way, the respective merits of the two are brought out. I quote from the essay. As for Jonson, to whose character I am now arrived, if we look upon him while he was himself, for his last plays were but his dotages, I think him the most learned and judicious writer which any theatre ever had. Yeah? So in his prime time, when he wrote Comedy of Humours and every man in his humour, Walpole, and many such plays, he was at the best. So he says the last plays were the dotages of the talent of Ben Jonson, but he was the most learned, judicious writers which any theatre ever had. When Dryden will come to compare the French and the English, when the English might be falling short of the French, because French are the better craftsmen, more judicious writer, at that time Dryden will use Ben Jonson against the French dramatist and will say that, see our Ben Jonson, he can stand with the best of the French dramatists also. I continue reading from the original essay. He was a most severe judge of himself as well as others. One cannot say he wanted wit, but rather that he was frugal of it. In his works you find little to retrench or alter. Wit and language and humour also in some measure we had before him. But something of art was wanting to the drama till he came. He managed his strengths to more advantage than any who preceded him. You seldom find him making love in any of his scenes or endearing to move the passions. His genius was too sullen and saturnine to do it gracefully, especially when he knew he came after those who had performed both to such a height also. Well, so he was not very passionate when it came to talk about love on the stage, but he was much controlled in that. That is how he is following a classical tradition. We know that even during the Greek days, love scenes were never performed on the stage. Neither were the death scenes, which are highly melodramatic. Maybe Dryden, to follow those traditions, was staying away from portraying the love or highly melodramatic scenes there. I continue from the original essay about Ben Jonson. Humor was his proper sphere, and in that he delighted most to represent mechanic people. He was deeply conversant in the ancients, both Greek and Latin, and he borrowed boldly from them. There is scarce a poet or historian among the Roman authors of those times whom he had not translated in Sejanus and Catiline. But he has done his robberies. This is quite humorous remark. Maybe the comic writer Dryden and Dryden's comic wit comes here when he's writing about Ben Jonson. But he had done his robberies so openly that one may see he fears not to be taxed by any law. He invades authors like a monarch, and what would be theft in other poets is only victory in him. Quite a satirical remark, but quite truly also that he presents in a humorous way about Ben Jonson. With the spoils of these writers, he so represents old Rome to us in its rites, ceremonies, and customs that if one of their poets had written either of his tragedies, we had seen less of it than in him. It seems like better than the Romans, he wrote about the Romans. Quite a humorous, a slightly satirical, a witty remark on Ben Jonson is presented by John Dryden. If there was any fault in his language, it was that he weaved it too closely and laboriously in his serious plays. Perhaps too, he did a little too much to Romanize our tongue, leaving the words which he translated almost as much Latin as he found them, wherein though he learnedly followed the idiom of their language, he did not enough comply with our language. Well, one may feel whether he is praising Dryden or criticizing Dryden. But well, his wit, Dryden's wit is double-sworded. It's like the sword with double edges. And it may seem like a praise, but he is slightly humorously satirical of Ben Jonson also. Maybe because he wanted to put Shakespeare as a better dramatist than Ben Jonson. Maybe because of that he is doing this here. Dryden's observations on Ben Jonson. Thus, to conclude his remarks on Jonson, he has given us the most correct plays. This is again something like the statues of the marbles, like French plays, but not humans. So it may be correct plays, it may be marble statues, but not having liveliness, which is very important for the definition of the play, just and lively image. So it may not have liveliness. Most correct plays. So in the percepts which he has laid down in his discoveries, we have as many and profitable rules for perfecting the stage as anywhere which the French can furnish us. So he uses Ben Jonson as against the argument that French dramatists are better because they have perfected the classical rules. So he uses English dramatist Ben Jonson against the argument that we also have such a kind of a dramatist. So no need to say that French are better than the English dramatists. We know that the basic purpose of his essay is to vindicate the English dramatist, English stage, as against the unjustified attack or unjustified favor of French drama. Finally, to conclude this observation on For the Dramatist, let us see how he compared Shakespeare and Ben Jonson. A very famous quote he used, I admire him but I love Shakespeare. In the final passage, while writing on Ben Jonson, he compared Ben Jonson with William Shakespeare. As a comparatist also we can see, but we may say whatever he has said as a comparatist is slightly subjective also. It may sound quite true after 500-600 years of the time when it was uttered, but at the same time we also can say that it seems to be a rather emotional expression as a comparatist. Let us see what is said. Atkins also has commented that most significant of all, however, is Neander's last word on their respective merits. Their, that is Ben Jonson and William Shakespeare. I quote from the original essay. The final lines, final paragraph on Ben Jonson where he compares with William Shakespeare. I quote, if I would compare him with Shakespeare, I would acknowledge him the most correct poet, but Shakespeare the greater wit. Shakespeare was the Homer or father of our dramatic poets. Jonson was the Virgil, the pattern of elaborate writing. I admire him, but I love Shakespeare. I admire him, but I love Shakespeare. And here judgment is pronounced, and not in accordance with the rules of technical excellence, but in the light of the general impression and of the emotional appeal to the whole man. Well, though it is emotional, though it is a little bit subjective, but the words that he has used are very significant. He brought in Homer and Virgil, the great the poet of the epic writers of Greek days, who wrote in 7th, 8th century BC, Homer, and then Virgil, who wrote in Latin language after around 700 years of Homer. And he said that Shakespeare is like Homer, the father of our dramatic poets. And Jonson is like Virgil, who has the pattern elaborate writing. So when you have these patterns of connections, the comparison doesn't remain only emotional or subjective, but he is giving the points of connections. He also said that Ben Jonson may be more correct poet, but Shakespeare is a greater wit. These points of connections make him a great comparatist also, even though this seems to be a very emotional appeal to the whole man, that is William Shakespeare. Finally, the words admire and love. Admire and love. Well, we know that we admire people when we see everything good in them. So admiration is connected with lots of positive aspects in the human being. But love is something different than admiration. We don't love people because people are good always. We don't love because people have only good characteristics. We love the whole man with what good or bad things they have. Sometimes we say that love is blind. Maybe it is said because love is blind to the negative aspects of the people who are loved. And so when he says, I admire Ben Jonson, but I love Shakespeare, he says that Ben Jonson is admired because of the good characteristics which are present in him, and you love Shakespeare with all the wrong things also which are found in Shakespeare. That is, so far as dramatic strategies are concerned, dramatic writing is concerned, dramatic craft is concerned, and not following classical rules are concerned. In that context, we may say that William Shakespeare might fall short of Ben Jonson. So, admire and love. Very interestingly, Ben Jonson presents this to us. Well, so this is Dryden's view. These are Dryden's views on Francis Beaumont, John Fletcher, Ben Jonson, and William Shakespeare. This was our third part of our discussion. We are having a discussion on Of Dramatic Poesy, an essay written in 1668 by famous poet, dramatist, and critic, considered as the father of English criticism also, John Dryden. Thank you everybody for your patience listening. Thank you, everybody.
स्वाध्यायः परमं